right, gents, episode 32 of the Racing Live podcast. How we going, man?
Good, mate. How are you?
Thanks. Good to be back.
Yeah, good to be back, Mick. How was Brazil?
Yes, decent, very decent.
Can you
Enjoyed
say-
myself a lot.
Can you say that you enjoyed yourself a lot in Brazilian or Portuguese?
I don't know what
Give
the
us-
word is for enjoy, but I know how to say like a lot and me. I just don't know how to say enjoy.
Say that part. Say that part. Then just give us something. Spit some bars.
I can't.
You can't.
With Spanish I would, but I can't do it in Portuguese.
Didn't immerse yourself in the culture, my friend.
Yeah, you weren't there long
Tried to.
enough.
Try to.
All right, let's jump straight into it then, boys. Bit of racing this weekend. So we had Formula 1 and MotoGP last night. So we're going to have a bit of a breakdown on both races. We're going to start with MotoGP. We're going to start with Formula 1 to begin with. So we had the race, the former San Marino Grand Prix. It's now known as the Grand Prix de Emilia, Romagna. Is that right?
I don't know. It's got the longest name in history.
That took place in Imola yesterday. First sprint race for the year. And we saw Max Verstappen come in first, Sergio Perez come in second, and in third, surprisingly, was Lando Norris, who made definitely the most of his opportunity. If you haven't watched the race, jump onto Foxtel, jump onto KO, get onto one of those KO minis and watch the race. We're going to talk about a few of the key talking points from the race tonight. Firstly, boys, it was the first sprint race of the year. And before we go any further, has your opinions of the sprint race format changed at all since its inception?
Yeah, I didn't actually mind it. It kind of negates the point of having practice 2, I feel, before the sprint race on a Saturday. The cars are in parc ferme, they can't make any changes. And I guess the only issue I see with it is because the cars are in parc ferme from Friday, no changes can be made. So if you're qualifying, your setup's crap on the Friday, you essentially can't make any changes for the whole weekend.
Fundamental changes anyway,
You're behind all weekend. But otherwise, I think from a spectacle point of view, I think it was good. What did you think?
I struggle to see the relevance with it still. I'm being perfectly honest with you. Like, I mean, obviously the spectacle's good, but is it really that good? I mean, how long was it? 21 laps?
Yep.
And for the most part, I think people they're pretty safe about the way they go racing for obvious reasons. I just don't see the real benefit, if I'm being honest with you. I mean, obviously we've got restrictions on the engines. We've got a cost cap now as it pertains to the race teams. So going around and running full beans just to essentially qualify for the race, I don't really see the point in it, particularly when it's only a few races a year. Like if it was a thing that we did every week and it was kind of the format that we needed to go racing, then yeah, maybe I could get on board with it a little bit more. But when it's only like a bit of a gimmick every so often, really just to appease the FIA who wanted to run it, but the teams don't want to run it. And I still think that a lot of the teams aren't really that interested in it. I don't know how I feel about it, particularly when you watch the race on Sunday and it's like, that's the full race. You don't even remember what happened in the sprint race. So that's how I kind of feel about it. And there's more points, there's more points now. You've got 8 points for first, moving down to 8th. So there's a bit more points on offer for a qualifying race, which is good if you're a team that needs to chase down points. But I don't know. I wouldn't say it's in the spirit of Formula 1, which is the pinnacle of motorsport, where gimmicks or gimmicky kind of things are supposed to be not really that prevalent. So yeah, I don't think I'm on board with it, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I prefer the traditional layout. Practice 1, 2, 3, quali, then the race.
Considering that qualifying is actually so good, I think the qualifying format that Formula 1 has is actually really quite engaging, and people like tune in to watch it already as it is. So why change something that is working really well and is definitely not broke? I'm not sure I understand. Did you watch the sprint race, Mick?
No.
So no opinion on it?
Well, wasn't the sprint race at Monza last year the race where Verstappen and Hamilton took each other out?
That was in the Grand Prix, but
They
there was
took it, right?
that weekend.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Oh,
Yeah.
so that incident didn't occur in the sprint race.
No.
Was the sprint race the one where Ricardo did well or something, or?
Yeah, he jumped
Yeah.
from 5th to 3rd, I think.
Yeah. Well, I don't have an opinion on it because I actually don't really know that much about it. I think my understanding is that it's obviously a shorter race. I don't know how the points work. Is it the same allocation of points or
No,
not?
it's 8 points for first, and then all the way down to 1 point for 8th.
Are they still like it's still championship points and all of that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think it's. I think it. I mean, anything like that, it always adds another dimension to the championship, I suppose. And is it met? Was it introduced to kind of give the traditionally less competitive teams something to go for, or is it just like a gimmick?
I think it was introduced originally because of the Mercedes dominance, and they wanted to try and mix up the weekends. But now that we've got these new cars, I don't think we need it. But yeah.
It's
fair
interesting. I don't know. It's going to be something that I wouldn't be surprised if it was not part of the championship for that long. Let's jump into some of the meat and potatoes of the weekend, boys. So all weekend we saw.
I love that saying, meat and potatoes.
I think that's
Mate,
the name
it's
of the pod this
Yeah,
week.
I think it just may be.
Yeah.
All weekend we saw Ferrari versus Red Bull again, and it's interesting. So we, earlier in the season, it seemed like there was a slight Red Bull advantage on the Saudi track, and then Ferrari have come back, really strongly in rounds 2 and round 3, and it kind of swung a little bit back in Red Bull's favor this weekend, which is obviously really good to see, particularly when you're trying to have a really competitive championship. So, I mean, obviously, we saw a few mistakes from Ferrari. Carlos got tangled up with Ricardo early in the race, so probably both a little bit at fault for that, hence the racing incident that was given. And then we saw a huge mistake from Leclerc 10 laps from the end that even this early in the championship kind of definitely gave a free kick to Verstappen and to Red Bull. So what do you boys make of that dynamic so far and how it's shaping the championship?
I honestly thought Ferrari were going to run away with it. My fantasy team was Leclerc was my turbo driver and the constructor was Ferrari. So I honestly thought they were going to absolutely dominate this weekend, just based on what happened in Melbourne. But it seems that Red Bull's fixed a few of their reliability issues. And I think that's the only thing that Red Bull was struggling with in a straight line. That Red Bull is just as quick, if not quicker, than the Ferrari. So I think we've now got a real battle on our hands, and Leclerc is very prone to these stupid little mistakes. And I think he needs to eradicate that from his repertoire, if you will. Otherwise, Verstappen's going to reel him in really quickly.
He was very lucky that the accident wasn't worse than it actually was, that he was actually able to drive away from it. Because if he comes in a little bit hotter or even on a slightly different angle, then it doesn't hit, he doesn't hit the barriers flush, he might have very easily had a broken suspension or a broken rear end. So he got very, very lucky with that accident, and then was able to make 4 spots to finish in 5th or 6th, whichever it was.
Sixth,
yeah. I think. So definitely very lucky. Mick, you haven't been on an F1 pod for a little while. What did you make of last night's race, mate?
Yeah, look, I has been a while. Obviously, I've been away for a bit. I'm enjoying this season though. I think there's heaps more in the races compared to last year. Just even seeing, like, for example, there was a lot of coverage in the last 10 laps or so that there was a bit of a battle going on between, was it Bottas and I don't know, some other car that traditionally isn't up there. I was like, this is cool. It's cars that we don't normally watch. But unfortunate for Sainz and Danny Rick at the start. Ferrari did look pretty strong, but I just find it cool that it's not Mercedes, to be honest. I'm enjoying it being a different manufacturer. Even though Red Bull's up there again, I just think it's cool that another team has kind of stepped up to the plate. I think it's really good to see. I love Italian tracks. The turnout there was amazing. I think you guys were talking about it in a pod that I missed. You guys were talking about like traditional tracks, you know where I stand on that. Imola's an amazing track, absolutely packed with Ferrari fans. So they were a little bit disappointed, but you know, I just think the spectacle was awesome. I enjoyed it. I just think there was heaps that happened in that race. Like you just mentioned, Leclerc hitting the wall. I don't know how his car, I don't know how the axles didn't completely bust and he could get that to the pits, to be honest. Like when you watch the replay, it's kind of like he turns the it's like he made his tires flush just before it hit the wall. So I think that got a little bit lucky there, but no, it was just really good. I just enjoyed every element of that race. You could say it was a little bit boring at the front at the end, but I just think there was enough happening throughout the whole 63 laps or whatever it was, to keep me interested. And normally, if we're going back to last year, I'd have been bored. So no, I really enjoyed it, and I think I'm enjoying it more and more as as this season heats up. I like that it's kind of got that unpredictability now. It's not like, oh, Hamilton's going to win every race. So yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Michael just mentioned he doesn't believe how Leclerc kept that car out of the wall. That kitty litter this whole weekend, like we had Bottas and Magnussen and Norris and Ocon in practice go off, and a few of them were very close to the wall. That kitty litter did its job because a lot of them were able to either get their car out or were just beached. All
Yeah,
they had
like
to do was get it.
signs.
Yeah, like amazing. Any other track, they're in the wall there and the car's gone. So
I don't know how Danny Rick actually got through it because you watched
It was
that
like it was a
incident.
bit wet.
Yeah, and he kind of glided over most of it and then managed to find that kind of escape road. So he was lucky there. But just to quickly touch back on something that I just touched upon, you were talking about like how unforgiving tracks like the more traditional tracks are because they haven't got all that runoff. It was just for me, it was just so good watching F1 being raced at a track like Imola. Like it's thinner, it's so fast, it's unpredictable. The sausage curbs, that Leclerc hit. Yeah, so I couldn't believe on the reverse angle how fast he was going through there. Granted, he was pushing hard, but just little things like that. I really enjoy seeing little nuances about the track. It was just cool.
Well, H, we were talking off air, just before Michael jumped on, and you were kind of saying that you were really anticipating racing at Imola, and then it kind of was a little bit of a dead fish of a race for you. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that opinion?
Yeah, like I'm with Mick. I think Imola is an awesome track. I absolutely love it. I love racing on it on the games, but I think these cars, and it's not for all traditional tracks, but for Imola in particular, and I think this may have been the reason why it was removed from the calendar. The cars are just too big, and there's no opportunity even in the braking zones. It's very hard to make that overtake, and it's only really in that DRS zone, and we'll get to the DRS in a second with the issues that we had there. But down that straight and that braking zone at the end for that chicane, that's pretty much the only overtaking we saw. I know there was
a bit of overtaking going into the
I think
into the hairpin at the back of the track, but then also going into that last chicane. There's I think 3 or 4 moves into that chicane, which was actually quite surprising.
Russell overtook, I think, one of the Alpines in that. I think it was Russell.
Someone took Magnussen as well in that particular section there.
Yeah.
But then also, I think something that has to be considered, like I said it last night on our chat, that I felt like there was more overtaking during the race, particularly without DRS, than I would have expected, which was really good to see. But then I think another part of the drama of motorsport and of the championship is about the did not finishes. So when you've got like a track like Imola and there's the incident between Sainz and Ricciardo on the first corner, Sainz didn't get out of the kitty litter. His race was done. And in a lot of tracks now, when you've got runoff, you're turning around, you're starting from the back and you're making your way back through the field in the fastest car on the track. So I think, and we saw the same thing in Albert Park for him as well. So I think that kind of jeopardy is still definitely a talking point of the championship. And even if it's not necessarily, the overtaking that you want to see, it still definitely does change the spectacle of the season, probably in a more dramatic way than than some of the overtaking does as well. The same thing with Leclerc's accident. With a lot of the tracks we have now where you don't have the chicanes like that, you know, he might go over the corner of the track and get a curb strike or something like that. But that was, you know, that dramatically changed the complexion of the race because he took, you know, was too aggressive going through that chicane. And I felt like that as a race, I think that it had enough, you know, drama, had enough overtaking for it to be a great race. And obviously we saw even, and we can probably talk about this a little bit later on, you know, even differences and difficulties that some of our better or our traditionally better drivers, people like Hamilton had, you know, making a move on Tsunoda going into the first corner for 15 laps. So I think
Gasly.
Gasly, sorry, yeah. So it was definitely, I felt like it was definitely, from my point of view, I thought it was like a pretty great race. I think there's definitely a point to be said about the size of the cars, and trying to get them, I don't know, even dropped by 15% would be, you know, huge for the ability to overtake and things like that. But it's definitely an interesting race. And again, I love the scenery. I love the fact that we're racing at Imola, and we need some more tracks that have a bit of gravel, a bit of grass, and a bit of rain. Definitely doesn't go astray. Boys, talking about Mercedes, particularly the Hamilton and Russell dynamic and how it's going right now. What do you make of the early season form of those two drivers?
I thought it was pretty telling at the end of quali, the little exchange between Hamilton and Toto. And you made a mention of it last week, Ant, that you don't think that Hamilton will hang around if this continues. And I think there is a few little cracks starting to appear there. I do think Mercedes will turn it around, but I think if Hamilton continues and he does it, you know, I don't think he would have thought that we would have seen that on TV, him and Toto going. So yeah, I can only imagine what's happening in the driver debriefs or whatever, but he says the right things on the radio, but behind the scenes, I think he's not a happy camper. And
he's starting to, sorry.
Yeah. I don't know if he's going to hang around for another year. Last week I thought you're crazy, but after
he's
this
starting
week,
to say less and less on the radio. And if the car wasn't performing, but he was still the best performing driver in the team, then he can make the excuse that it's all the team and not him.
Yep.
And there's definitely something to be said for the issues that car has. Yep. When you consider that with George Russell in a Mercedes, that he was losing time to Lando Norris, who was ahead of him in a McLaren Mercedes. So there's definitely more to that car than just the engine, which is interesting. But then also from a Hamilton point of view, with him being mired in 14th or wherever it was, maybe 12th by the end of the race, it might have been, or 11th. It doesn't really matter when you're not scoring points. And you've got someone like Russell who really hasn't put a foot wrong this year. He's maximized every opportunity that he's had, and he's sitting fourth in the championship, which is quite phenomenal. There's definitely something to be said about that.
I saw a stat today. He's finished in the top 4 or 5 in every race this year.
Yeah,
and considering
the car doesn't deserve it.
No, that's right. So he's doing really well.
So I can't really fault him. I think he's doing a great job, but it definitely does put a lot of pressure on Hamilton, who hasn't been qualifying well at all. And he had a horrible start to the race yesterday, and kind of set the tone for the rest of the race for him. Joseph made the point on the chat. I think it's something that might be worth giving a little bit of screen time to. Does not the upbringing, but the recent history of the two drivers play any part in how they're dealing with this troubled car? So you've got someone like Hamilton, who has been in the most dominant car for the last 7 years of his career, who has dominated in that car, but rightly so, because obviously the performance of the car should be nothing less. And you've got someone like Russell, who's had to scrap for the last 3 years to make anything happen in a Williams. Do you think that his experiences with an underperforming car in his recent past has played a role in how he's performing this year? Or for someone like Hamilton with that much experience, that really shouldn't be an excuse?
Oh, look, if I just add my 2 cents here, like I think there's always merit in anything, in any, profession where you've had to graft, in maybe, a situation that isn't as advanced as your peers. I think it's always going to put you in good stead when you do have machinery, or you're elevated to a position where your situation is a little bit easier. Now, granted, the Mercedes isn't phenomenal this year, as we can see, but I'm sure it's a lot better than the Williams that he was trying to drive last year. So, I mean, looking at his performance yesterday, he was making the best of a car that Hamilton can't wrap his head around yet, it seems. So I think that there'd have to be some merit in what you just posed, but at the same time, I'd like to see Hamilton really go for it this year, because if he's as good as we all say he is, and the media loves to say he isn't this is the kind of year where I want to see an almost Michael Schumacher outperform your machinery kind of season. Like, we know how many years Michael struggled in a Ferrari that was subpar. Now Hamilton's had the benefit of having, you could say, the best car for a long time. I want to see what it's like now that he's got a car that isn't up to scratch, so to speak. So me, as someone relatively new to the sport again, I'm interested in seeing that. So for him to kind of be, to be honest, he hasn't been looking too much. I thought it'd be worse, to be honest, but I'd like to see him really attack this season and try to go for it, even though I don't think he's going to win. It'd be good to see him really attempt to outperform the car. I think that's what I'd like to see. But I think there's definitely credence to what you were saying about Russell having to graft. I think that's a valid point.
The interesting thing about the season is it'll be interesting to see how, if he does finish ahead of Russell or not, and then obviously if he doesn't, how far behind Russell he does finish, because obviously we know his history, we know how dominant he's been over the last decade almost. But could this potentially tarnish his reputation? Obviously, even when Schumacher wasn't performing in an underperforming Ferrari, he was still always beating his teammate pretty convincingly if he wasn't injured, except for maybe his last year when Rosberg, in Mercedes, when Rosberg definitely was the better of the two drivers. So this, if the car's underperforming and Hamilton, is underperforming in relation to his performances as opposed to Russell, I think the reality, even this early in the season, that this could be a swan song, is pretty high. I think it's pretty high, because I don't think Russell's going to get any worse. He's already, like we've said, his consistency is definitely starting to show already. So we can only imagine that he's only going to get better as the car continues to perform as well. So it's definitely an interesting thing to consider. Another thing that has blown me away to start this year, and I want to get you boys' opinion on it as well. Valtteri Bottas, I couldn't say enough things last year to sink his ship as a racer. I kind of thought he was washed up, and I made it pretty clear that I felt a particular way about him. But to start this year, he has been phenomenal. He has been really good. Now, obviously, some of that might have to do with how well that Ferrari engine is performing, but he looks like a totally new driver. He reminds me of the really assured, the really confident, the driver that was making moves at Williams before his move to Mercedes. Is that something that you guys are seeing as well?
Yeah, I think you can only imagine the psychological toll it has being in a team that's tailored towards one driver for so many years. And now that he's gone to Alpha, who essentially have said, you're our number one, you got a rookie beside you, we want you to mentor him, blah, blah, blah. He's taken that role on, I think, really well. And he's showing, and he mentioned it in the Beyond the Grid website last year, podcast last year with Tom Clarkson, that he said, these year-to-year contracts have been messing with my head, and it's good moving forward that I'm going to have some security with Alfa Romeo, and he's able to just concentrate on the driving. So I think Carlos has said something recently as well, something similar. Having multi-year contracts is good for mentally moving forward. So I think we're seeing the benefits of that with Valtteri.
But they've just given him a multi-year contract, which is great as well from Ferrari's point of view. It's really interesting, but because I mean, we saw the same thing with Gasly, and he's kind of completely changed his racing since he left Red Bull. So there's definitely something to be said about the going into a team where you're the number 2 driver. I think you see something slightly. You look at someone like Sergio Perez on the other hand, who kind of knows his role very clearly, and he's performing as well as he possibly can in that particular environment. So it's probably a horses for courses kind of scenario.
Yep.
But I was happy to say last year, I said it a few times, that Bottas really hadn't deserved his spot on the grid anymore, and he's been phenomenal. Even watching him race this weekend, if he didn't have that incident in the pit lane where they took a little bit more time, he probably would have been right there with Norris fighting for a podium. That's, I think, a fairly realistic expectation to have for how he was going.
Yeah, what did he finish? Like 15 seconds behind or something? Or was it less?
I don't even think it might have been 6 seconds, man. Like I don't think it was that far.
Yeah, right.
Behind it all. So there was definitely a consideration that could have been the case. Some more interesting news that I stumbled across last night, and this is probably a little bit of a information that can be used to troll, but Aston Martin and the rumors that they, a stroll troll, that's what it could be called. Aston Martin and the rumors that they could be selling to Audi. After all the statements that have been made, all the, we're here for the long haul, we're here to do it right, we're going to invest in a new campus, and all this kind of rhetoric that we've been getting from Lawrence Stroll over the last 2 years. The team's underperformed since the tracing point, and that has to be said. Probably hasn't helped this year that the Mercedes engine is doing so poorly as well. But is this, do you think, a something that could come to fruition, considering how much talk and how much money has been invested in reinvigorating the Aston Martin brand?
Yeah, I was doing some reading today, and Audi obviously want in to Formula One. McLaren's obviously not selling. So they've gone to the next best thing, I think, and a team that's about to put the infrastructure in place to become a force, I guess, in the next 10 years, say. And I guess Audi wants something that they will be able to construct their own engines. And I think the new factories that Aston Martin are building, they're looking at that potentially as we could do our own car development, our own engine development, and base it all out of the one factory. The only thing that I worry about this rumor is Stroll has said many times that he's wants to build a Formula One dynasty. He's put all this money in. His son's obviously a driver. He doesn't strike me as the type that's willing to give up so quickly after what, 2 years, 3 years? I think
his ego definitely would make me think the same, but he's also a businessman. And I can't see someone as ruthless as him not getting a return on investment if things aren't going as he would expect them to be performing. So it's definitely interesting. I don't know, like, would it be a complete sale to Audi? Would it be 51-49 and it's going to be called Aston Martin Audi Racing? I mean, is it even just a hoax? It's very interesting to see how this story plays out. And it's even more interesting because we spoke about it last week, saying that in order for the team to be taken seriously, some serious changes probably need to be made at the driver point of view. I mean, talking about this, what's our mate that we think is an interesting name? Mike Crack said yesterday. So the question was asked whether Vettel is, performing up to the prescribed standards of his contract and whether there's consideration about moving on next year. To which he said, "I don't see why there'd be any reason why we'd want to move off a 4-time world champion," which is bizarre. Like, I mean, considering that he hasn't really done a whole lot to justify the contract. So, I mean, I understand that you want to keep your drivers happy, but at the same time, if you're the management of a team, surely you want to put a little bit of pressure on the drivers to perform as well if they're not at that level. So, I mean, Aston Martin right now, they're in a very interesting situation. I guess it was the first time this year that they've had a double points finish, which is a benefit. But again, when it's 7th and 10th, and you've got a McLaren finishing 3rd, Alfa Romeo finishing in 5th, that's hardly anything to write home about, because even though they've got that double points finish, they still lost ground on those people that they're racing against, except for maybe Renault, Alpine. So it's definitely a conversation or a storyline to be aware of moving forward. But yeah, I'm not sure I know how I feel about that.
What I've taken from all these rumors is Audi or Volkswagen really want into Formula One over the next few years, and I think they would prefer to purchase a team with infrastructure already in place rather than starting from scratch. And they're going around the paddock at the moment trying to find somewhere to start up. So interesting times.
If Aston Martin were not to sell and Audi did have to buy in, could you see them potentially doing a deal with someone like Andretti and splitting that cost, maybe, and having an Andretti Audi team?
That would be awesome and could happen. I guess the only issue is Andretti hasn't got Formula One infrastructure in place, and I think that's what Audi wants. But I guess if you're splitting the cost,
well, it's a next best thing, right? If you don't if you can't get your foot in the door by buying a team, then at least go in with a team that's got a bit of pedigree at racing, and then you can kind of consolidate both of your corporations to try to get everything moving a little bit faster. Before we finish up on Formula One, I thought we better go through the power rankings for this week. So I've put together the power rankings, taking into consideration, well, I'll tell you what my key considerations were for this particular power ranking. There's been a few mistakes to start this season. So I was kind of thinking about what drivers have done everything within their power to maximize every race meeting that they've been in. And I kind of did my ranking based off of that, as opposed to obviously the performance of the cars. So I've got Verstappen in first. Obviously he's DNF'd from 2 races, but that had nothing to do with him. So you can't really fault him. The races he's finished in first. The other 2 races he was second in Melbourne. He was leading Saudi Arabia. So he was definitely maximizing his races, and he's made no mistakes yet. I have to put Russell in second, purely because he's maximized every race with the car, and he's significantly outperforming Lewis Hamilton in the last 2 races as well. Leclerc has made some mistakes, and that was taken into consideration as to why he went behind Russell, but he still won a couple of races, and he's still leading the championship. So that has to be taken into consideration as well. Fourth, I've got Perez, a little bit unlucky with engine issues earlier in the year. Has made a few mistakes, hasn't qualified as well as he should, but has definitely reclaimed those positions in the race. And he's kind of done everything he can for the team. So he's up there in fourth. I've got Lando Norris in fifth. McLaren are looking all over the place to start the year. And even after the first race where there was a no points finish, he's maximized the car for the rest of the year. So that has to be taken into consideration. He's had 2 podiums. No, he's had 1 podium this year as well, which is definitely outperforming where the car should be. So that has to be given its credit. I've got Bottas in sixth, just for getting some strong points finishes this year. Has had a complete, facelift as a driver this year. Magnussen in seventh, significantly outperforming Mick Schumacher to start the year. Has come back to F1 and has taken no time to really get his feet under him again. He's just powered straight in, even without the neck muscles, which is awesome to see. I've had to put Albon in eighth. Now, it's probably a little bit of a stretch, but the guy's done nothing wrong.
I think he's had a great season.
he's making Latifi look probably even worse than Russell did. He's significantly outperforming the car. He's another one of those drivers really that he's come back to F1 after a stint in Red Bull where he looked lost to the world. And he's really showing his potential again as a Formula One driver. So I think a lot of credit has to go to Albon and what he's doing. I mean, he finished ahead of Lewis Hamilton in a Williams. That has to be.
He had no DRS for the whole race, and Gasly and Hamilton had DRS behind him, and they still couldn't pass him.
Really, I didn't know that.
Because he wasn't, whoever was in front of him, Stroll. I think Stroll
the
was
DRS train. Gotcha. Yeah, true.
So Albon was at the front of that train and didn't let any of them pass. So I think he did amazing.
Good effort. And I've got Hamilton in ninth by default because he's had a few good finishes earlier in the season. And my last one has to go to Tsunoda. Again, seemed all over the place at the end of last year in the AlphaTauri. Has had 2 points finishes in the last 3 races. Had a did not start, unfortunately for him, but he's definitely been really good for AlphaTauri and has probably outperformed Gasly, I have to say, to start the season. So that's my top 10. What do you think?
Can't argue with it, mate. The only thing that I probably would have done if I wrote them was probably swap Russell and Leclerc, but I totally get your reasoning behind it. Otherwise, I was just looking at that and I saw Tsunoda's name and I thought, what the hell? But then you look at the season overall, he's been a quiet achiever, but he's outperformed Gasly and he's done really well. So, maybe Magnussen on top of Bottas just because of that Haas, it probably isn't as good as the Alpha. But otherwise, mate, I think that's pretty spot on.
All right, we'll chuck that up on the socials.
Will do.
Tomorrow as well. So if you want to get on, get in the comments and tell us what you think as well, please, by all means, do it. And before we jump away, we started the F1 Fantasy this week, and the leader going into after our first race meet has to go to William Seal on 420 points. So keep it up, Mr. Seal. I'm close behind on 402, and then I think there's a little bit of a gap. And Mick, you still haven't joined, mate.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be joining, lads.
At least you're honest about it. Some people always, those people that always say, "Yeah, I'll join," and they never join. At least you're not one of those folks. We have to give a bit of credit for that.
Yeah.
All right. Let's jump into MotoGP then, lads. So we had the second race, was actually the first race of the night because it was before the F1 last night. It took place in Algarve in Portugal. What's that, round 4 of the MotoGP season, Mick?
That is round 4, yes.
So very interesting race. MotoGP this year is throwing up all kinds of curveballs. Like definitely can't be understated. And guess what I've just done? I've just deleted my bloody talking points for MotoGP. Hey, you're gonna have to tell me.
So we're looking at the Yamaha dilemma first up.
Oh, that's probably a good place to start. This Yamaha bike up to this point has kind of been nowhere. They haven't really qualified that well, and as Yamahas normally do, once they get wide in the field, they really struggle to pass. But we saw Quartararo really execute the perfect race today. He started from close enough to the front, got to the lead very quickly, and it was kind of we can still say a very Lorenzo-esque race win for him. But I mean, Maverick Vinales did the same thing when he was on the Yamaha. We're seeing Quartararo do the same thing as well. So it's just very interesting. The bike's been nowhere. Even this race, we had Dovizioso and Morbidelli kind of sitting 15th and 16th. They jumped up a little bit higher when Nakagami crashed, and so did the Mir incident. But he's significantly outperforming. For him to win that race by 8 seconds, and for everybody else on a Yamaha to be outside the top 10 is, it definitely says a lot about how well he's performing.
You're talking about Quartararo.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think we can talk about the Yamaha bike, and we can obviously see that in the first couple of races, Yamaha struggling for straight line speed. I don't think Portimao is necessarily a track where straight line speed is going to factor in massively to that track. I mean, obviously there's quite a long straight, but I feel like the exit to the last corner is probably more important than straight line speed. It's not really a long straight. If the bikes that had the least anti-wheelie were coming out of that banking sweeping last corner were the ones that were really making up a lot of time, and we saw that with Quartararo, like the way he found the slipstream behind me early in the race and overtook him coming down the straight shows that it's not necessarily a straight line speed track. And then we know how Quartararo is so dominant at Portimao. He did the same thing last year where he was engaged in quite a long back and forth with Rins, but even then he was still faster. So I think that Quartararo's ability to perform well at that track kind of hides some of the deficiencies in the Yamaha, but we also know that Yamaha is a good bike on windy, tire preservation kind of circuit. So I just think that I don't think we can read too much into it. I think it's a quarter track. I think he did what he did last year, put his foot down. He watched Mir for a few laps, and then he just never looked back. Granted, I think Mir was a little bit hampered because his front tire he set after.
Yeah, he was having so many wheelies coming onto that straight.
You could tell he wasn't comfortable, and generally Mir goes into the race. So to see him kind of deteriorating from like pretty early on was a little bit uncharacteristic. It was very unfortunate how his race ended, because I think just because of the way he defends, I think he could have still finished second or third. But the way Miller was coming would have, you could make the argument that he wouldn't have. So it was unfortunate. But I think with regards to Quartararo, he loves that track. I think when we get to some of the more straight line speed tracks in Europe, Austria comes to mind. We'll see. I think we'll see deficiencies in the Yamaha again, but Quartararo was dominant, and I think it's like what the commentators are saying. It was very Lorenzo-esque once he got in front.
Now that Lorenzo's retired, can we start calling it Quartararo-esque, or is it just Yamaha-esque? Because, like I said, it's definitely something Lorenzo did. It's something Vinales did when he was early on in his Yamaha career. It seems to be that bike on some tracks, if they're able to get into the lead, they're able to hold it there. But if they're kind of mired in the midfield, it doesn't really make its way through the field that well.
To be honest, I knew Quartararo was legit in that race. After you could see after like the first three corners, he jumped like a few spots, and then I was like, well, I can't see Mir holding him off, knowing how fast he was. He was doing 39s nearly every. Yeah. So, and that's like what he was doing for qualifying. So I was like, he's doing qualifying speed every lap, and he did the same thing last year. And to be honest, the only person that I thought would challenge him would have been Rins, because Rins does 39s at that track consistently too, but he was, starting at the back of the grid.
Probably used up too much tire getting up to them. Like,
yeah.
Talking about, let's jump into that then. Let's jump into I wanted to talk about Suzuki a little bit, because it was really like an interesting to see Mir kind of started up the front, but faded pretty quickly. But even like we say he faded, he makes it so difficult for people to get past him. Like, I love how tenacious he is at, trying to stay ahead. But then on the other hand, someone that we've talked about quite a lot, which is Alex Rins, starting from 24th, he made up, I think it was 10 or 12 positions in the first two laps, which is ridiculous.
10 positions in the first 3 or 4 corners.
Well, there you go. Like, talk about insane. But again, that was a really impressive ride by Rins. He probably had to chew up a little bit more of his tire than some of the people at the front early just to get to the front. But then even towards the end, when he was sitting in 4th, and I kind of was thinking, is he going to push to try to get the podium, or is he just going to settle for the points? From my point of view, I was really quite impressed that he didn't keep pushing, and he just kind of, it's almost like he said, making 20 positions in this race, is more than enough for, what my championship needs. And he kind of just settled there. And I was quite impressed to see that, because I think maybe he's starting to mature as a rider and kind of think about the long game. He's probably taken a leaf out of his teammates' book in that regard.
Yeah, look, I am very quietly, and everyone knows where my allegiances lie in this sport, but I'm very quietly confident in Suzuki this year. I think if Mir doesn't get taken out by Miller yesterday, they're both 1 point behind Quartararo in the standings. That would have been on the same amount of points. I think there's two things here. I think Rins, they're obviously both in contract years, which is enough incentive anyway. But I think Rins really reset over the break. He's got a completely different attitude, and I think if you look at his socials and the way he's talking and just the confidence in him is phenomenal this year. He's riding completely differently. He's not taking stupid risks, but at the same time, he's being aggressive. He's obviously very confident in the bike. Like he hasn't fallen yet, fingers crossed. But I think the improvements in the bike, they're both riders really happy with. So considering that considering that none of the tracks that have been raced at are historically tracks that Suzuki do well at, and looking at where they've positioned themselves at the start of the year, I'd be very worried if I were the other teams, because I think Suzuki, as we saw with Mir 2 years ago, don't necessarily have to be winning races. I think if they can get a few wins, but also just stay at the top of the podium, I think they're very well positioned for a really strong year. And don't underwrite how much Rins' early success this year would be pissing Mir off too, because he's a bit of a silent assassin. And even when he fell off yesterday, there was all like hugs and smiles after it. But you saw him get up and do the sarcastic clapping to Miller when he got taken out. He'd be pissed. So I really think that moving forward, look out for Suzuki, because they're coming hard with that new bike, and I think both riders are very impressed. I would not be surprised if after a strong year they both end up renewing, because I think they're both very happy with the bike.
I think the way that they're performing, obviously they can't win the Constructors' Championship with the fleet that Ducati has, but
they're leading it now. So
they're leading the constructors or the teams.
Sorry, they're leading the team.
Yeah, I don't know if they can do the constructors with the just the
pull that up actually, because
the amount of firepower that Ducati has. It's definitely. I was definitely very impressed, and obviously let's move into that Jack Miller incident. We spoke about it last week. I kind of said that until Jack Miller's able to put multiple positive races together, I can't take him as seriously as we need to. He had a great race last week, finished on the podium, was coming through the field this week. I mean, Michael said that he might have got ahead of Mir. I think he was definitely getting ahead of Mir. The question was whether he was going to get ahead of Zarco to finish that race. And then we obviously saw what happened. And, it was a shame for Mir, because, he was having a great race, really did nothing wrong and just kind of got cleared out. What did you make of it, mate?
Look, up until the incident, he was a factory Ducati rider. He was the highest one. Where was Pecco? He was down in 21st or something at that point.
We got to talk about Pecco after this as well, though.
Yeah, and I think if he doesn't have that incident, we're having a very different conversation. So I guess that I last night I kind of sat back and I thought this is probably what Michael and Anthony have been saying, because Joey and I have been very vocal against you two in terms of the Miller hate. But I kind of get
Miller
now.
hate.
Yeah, you haven't been here. Yeah, look, I think if he's doing that consistently throughout the season, I can now see why you guys don't see him as a championship contender, even though he is currently the top Ducati factory rider.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because he definitely, before this race, I said it last week, he's performed by far the best of the Ducati riders on the factory team up to this point. But then he gets no points because he puts it into the kitty litter. And you've got someone like Bagnaia, who was starting 23rd, was sitting 21st up till halfway through the race, and then manages to come home in 7th. And then that kind of shows you what he's up against. Bastianini had an ordinary race, crashed. Miller crashed. Zarco had an awesome race. Bagnaia had an awesome race from where he started. And the thing that he's got to contend with isn't just Bagnaia. That's the other, misconception about the scenario. I mean, I think of all the Ducati riders, him and Zarco are in the most pressure to retain their seats on that Ducati. And you see Zarco finishes in second. Has already done something to kind of prop himself up. If Miller finishes on the podium twice in 2 races, he puts himself back in that conversation as well. But mistakes like that just aren't going to cut it for him. And he'll find the ride. There's already talk of him moving back to LCR Honda next year as well, which is interesting, considering the resources they don't have compared to Pramac, some would say. But I just don't think he did himself any favors. And when you look at someone like Emilia as well, who has won championships before, just from I like the word that you used, Michael, grafting, getting the points that are on offer, not overplaying your hand, and to be taken out like that and to lose 16 valuable championship points, that'd be a little bit of a issue. H, you got to tell me what my next talking point, mate, was. Unfortunately, I don't have them with me.
So you could go either with Aprilia or Suzuki.
Oh, we've spoken about Suzuki. Aprilia has to be another big talking point for the early season so far. Mick, I mean, they had a little bit of a underwhelming race last time out after their first win, but Aleix Espargaro is, turning into a fine wine as a rider. He's getting better with age. Again, had a really, really good late race pace, but then we also saw the maturity of the man. Obviously, probably used up a little bit of tyre to get up to the back of Zarco, didn't overplay his hand, settled for third, and he definitely has to be considered in this early season championship battle.
Yeah, look, I think to an extent, I think Aleix did an Aleix. Aleix is if Aleix has shown anything, he's not the most aggressive of riders. He's very conservative in that sense, but he's not afraid to obviously push this Aprilia bike, which, from all accounts so far, just looks really consistent. It looks well-rounded. It actually is really surprising me. Like, it doesn't surprise me.
Top speed,
It doesn't surprise me in the sense that, they've obviously had a lot of concessions for a number of years now, so they should be there. But it seems just like a very well-rounded bike, and I'm really happy for Aprilia because I feel like, the more competitive these bikes are across all manufacturers, the better the sport will benefit. So no, I'm really enjoying it. Look, especially to think of Aleix as being, like I said, a conservative rider and someone who I wouldn't necessarily rate as a killer. The fact that he's there or thereabouts is, for me, validation of the bike itself. So I wouldn't go as far to say as he's a championship threat, but you never know. Like we've seen, like I said 2 years ago, that if riders can just be consistent, they don't necessarily have to win 5-6 races to win a championship. If you're there or thereabouts and you're consistently on the podium, you can win 1 or 2 races, and your consistency will take you to the title. So that's why I'm saying this year so far is completely up in the air. I don't think we're going to have a year like last year where you have one rider winning a whole stack of races. I think the way that the championship works with how diverse every track is, I think we're going to have different race winners quite frequently. And again, it's just going to be who's more consistent and who doesn't fall off the bike. Like I really expected more from Pecco at the start of this season. He doesn't seem to be as formidable, let's say, as he was proving to be last year. So yeah, I just think it's all up in the air. But Aprilia, they've really impressed me so far. I think if we're going to talk about Aprilia, a team, a manufacturer that I thought would have been a little bit more impressive this year I would say would have to be Ducati. They've got the most bikes on the grid. I'm a little bit underwhelmed so far as to their performance. Yes, Anea has won the first race, etc. But to have that many bikes,
2 races.
Well, yeah, to have that many bikes and to have so much quality on them, to be honest, I would have I expected probably more podium presence so far. So I think in terms of what I would have expected to see more, I probably would have expected to see more Ducati podiums so far, given just the sheer numbers.
They're definitely having an issue staying on those bikes. I mean, Martin crashed yesterday, Miller crashed yesterday, Bagnaia came from the back, had a good race, but really shouldn't be starting. He crashed twice on the Saturday and injured himself, which is why he started at the back. But it definitely hasn't been a Bagnaia. That's why he started at the back. So
I was very
there's definitely
surprised
issues
with
on that
Martin.
bike. Yeah, there's issues with that bike and people staying on it. Yeah.
Well, look, like I said, we've done a few of the tracks now that are speed tracks. I'm very interested to see the next, especially when we start to. Yeah, I'm very, very interested to see Jerez because Jerez is probably one of my favorite tracks in the calendar. Full stop. I mentioned it in the chat with yesterday. It's a track that Marquez loves, and that actually segues nicely into Honda, who I also think have been pretty average, to be honest, so far. It's going to be very interesting. I think Jerez will tell us a lot about where everyone's at because it's got speed, it's got cornering. It's a track that a lot of the paddock love because so many riders are Spanish and they grew up there. And I think Jerez will tell us a lot. But
is it conceivable to see Quartararo having a similar race again next week?
I don't think so. I think he'll be up there, but I think Jerez has more. I think it's more speedy than Portimao. It's definitely not as it's not good. You're not, the gradient's not
undulating
going up and down, and you're not making those kind of turns, which I think Quartararo loves. But I think it's going to tell us a lot because the Ducatis will have opportunities to obviously flex their muscle with the speed. But also we know that, like I said, people like Marc Marquez, Rins loves Jerez as well. Last year he was doing really well before he fell. So I think it's going to be a very interesting track, very interesting race at a track that everyone loves. So really keen for Jerez. I think it's going to be very telling.
Well, let's finish on Honda then. Interesting race for Honda. I mean, you had 3 riders that were pretty much nose to tail for the whole race. You had Alex Marquez, who had the best race of, I would say, his career. He's finished higher than that before, but just from a competitive point on a bike that seemed to struggle yesterday, I was really impressed with his race. He definitely did need it because if there's 2 riders on the grid that are in serious consideration for losing their seats, it's got to be Nakagami, who fell again, and Alex Marquez. So
I have not seen a race because I don't watch every single race. I have not seen a race where that guy hasn't fallen off his bike.
Mate, he's fallen off a cliff because there was a time where his trajectory and his stock was really starting to rise.
Yeah.
And he's just got no confidence.
The first half of 2020, he was going through like a bit of a purple patch where he was qualifying really well. He finished 1 or 2 races in a really good position, and everyone was saying, this guy will look out for him. And then I think when they got to, I think it was Valencia, he fell twice in 2 weeks. I think he crashed out of second in the first lap, one of those races. And seriously, since then, all of last year and all of this year, he's been abysmal. And yeah, I do agree. I think he's probably my rider who's at most risk of losing his seat. But just to touch upon Honda, again, I don't think necessarily the tracks that we've raced at this year are Honda tracks, if I'm being completely honest. We've got to remember that Marc Marquez has only ever raced at Portimao once, I believe. So as good as Marc is, I just think there's other riders there that are better at that track. I think that's why I keep saying Jerez is going to be a massive indication, I think, of where Marc is at, but also where Honda's at, because Marc, infamously crashed at Jerez, this is where all his problems started really. In a race where he was absolutely
Killing
mobbing
it.
everyone down, pre-crash. It probably would have been one of his greatest victories had he not crashed.
Because he almost he saved it and came out last
Well,
again, right?
he was
saved
coming.
it.
Well, even the fact that he was racing, I'm pretty sure he had a massive accident in qualifying or practice that weekend. Got on the bike, started
Led the
from a
race.
ridiculous position.
No,
and
Michael,
then-
he led the race,
Mm.
saved it, but went into the gravel, came back
Yeah,
out last,
yeah.
and then was back fighting for the lead and just.
It was going to be one. It was
Cooked
going to be one of. It was going to be one of his greatest wins if he won that race. Probably his greatest. You could make the argument if he had won that race, but he obviously didn't. So I think next week's going to be massive for Honda. Let's see where Mark's at. I'm genuinely very concerned about this guy because, I mean, he came off the bike, hit his head this week. I'm thinking, 2 rounds of diplopia. Is he going to be concussed again? He got up and said he was fine. I'm concerned about Mark, but that's another discussion for another day. But let's see how Jerez goes, because I think Jerez generally is pretty much open season for a lot of teams. A lot of manufacturers perform really well there. You've got Aprilia now in the mix. KTM, they've already shown that they're there or thereabouts. So I think it's anyone's game.
Oliveira with his 4th place and his win this year and the inconsistency of the season from where he was last year, and everyone's saying, what's happened to Oliveira? He hasn't really had the most consistent season this year, but he's got some decent points early on. So even him, I mean, he's kind of put together a semi-decent start to the season that should really give him confidence moving into the European leg of the championship.
Now that we're in Europe, I think I think the real title contenders are going to really come to the fore in the next 2-3 rounds. So I think look out, but it's the beauty of MotoGP. You can never tell. It's anyone's game. There's so many, and I think it was telling also, just to finish, it was very telling that Rins was able to take, I think, the back 10 riders, like I said, in about 2 or 3 corners. And then when you get to that top 12 and all that, you start hitting all of those talented riders. It's so tight amongst that top 12. It's just insane. Like anyone can win. Anyone can win on any given week on any given bike. And I think that's part of the beauty of that category.
I love the passion.
Mm.
I love the passion with which you discuss MotoGP matters, Michael. And like I said on the chat last night, you come alive for a good 45 minutes on the chat every week and then disappear. So,
H, I've got to ask you this. So last night on the chat, you kind of said that you watched MotoGP with your brother, and you just it's kind of, but not really giving you the feels just yet. And you were hanging for the F1, and then you were slightly underwhelmed by the F1 product.
Yep.
Watching those back to back, did it kind of give you a little bit more respect for the 2-wheeled category?
No, I still preferred the Formula One. I don't know what it is. Like I said to you guys, I understand in theory that MotoGP is an excellent category, right? Like Michael just so eloquently told us, anyone on any given day can win the race. There's multiple contenders, blah, blah, blah. For me, I don't know if it's because it doesn't look as dramatic as the cars going around a track. I don't know. I just can't. Both of us were there trying to watch it last night, and I just couldn't. I don't know. It just wasn't doing it.
Could it be just that it still maybe needs a little bit more time to percolate in your imagination? Like it's still a very new. It's still like a fair. Like we're kind of 15 years into this love affair where you're kind of just still flirting with the girl. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah.
We're probably at different stages in the thing, but I'm to echo what Michael's saying. As a Formula One enthusiast, MotoGP is good to watch. 50-minute race, anything like Marquez was sitting nowhere for the whole race, but bloody hell was it in through all it. Like it's always such a good watch.
I'll tell you what got me, because my motorsport journey is a little bit different to say Anthony or Joe's, or probably even you, Harry, because I've never really been someone who, I've always liked it. It's always been something that I've looked at from afar and admired, whatever. But I think I think with MotoGP, I obviously I've followed Suzuki's progression quite closely since they re-entered the sport. But even then, I wasn't really like all into it until probably 5 years ago. But what really sold me was just the brevity of the races. Like you're not there for an hour and a half watching. It's 50 minutes at most, and just I find just the unpredictable nature of it, but also like the fact that it's not the same person every week. Last year was a little bit like that, and when Mark was in his pomp, I just think how good he was led to the fact that he was winning a lot. But now, the last 3 years or so, it's just become so even, and I just think that just makes for me anyway a really good spectacle. To have so many manufacturers that are so close, I just think makes it such a good product. I'd love to, and I think F1 this year is kind of getting closer to that. I think where you are with MotoGP, I'm probably with F1. I think it's probably just going to be time. So maybe like I know as time goes by, and talking with you guys and probably understanding the sport more, because I hadn't watched it for so long. There's so many things that I don't know about. I think as I get used to it more and learn more of these nuances, I'm enjoying it more. So maybe that's just something that, as time goes by, you'll begin to enjoy more. But do you feel like getting used to the teams and the riders and the little back and forth moments throughout the season, you're starting to understand it more, if not enjoy it more a little bit? Or is it still something that you're hesitant to kind of embrace?
It's not that I'm hesitant to embrace. I'm still struggling to know, who's affiliated with who, and satellite team. Like it seems very messy coming from Formula One, if that makes sense. You got your
teams are more.
You got your 10 teams.
Yeah.
Those teams are the teams. They've obviously got affiliations with their engine supplier, but that's pretty much it. Whereas trying to wrap my head around the MotoGP grid.
You probably
need to pick a team, H. You probably need to pick a team.
Well, I like Marquez, so I'm probably going to go Honda. Otherwise, it'll be Ducati.
Be creative. Let's open it up. Go KTM or Aprilia.
I reckon jump on. Yeah,
I don't even know what Aprilia is.
I reckon jump on the KTM
brand.
I'd be jumping on that KTM bandwagon. I think there's so much potential there, and you've got an Aussie rider, ready to go. You can follow his progression, because I don't think your mate Miller will ever really do anything. So why not jump on that Gardner train?
Maybe. I don't know. I'm looking forward to this weekend. I'll watch this weekend again.
You need F1. You need that MotoGP Unlimited to drop in Australia. Yes. That might give you the push.
We need a boys trip to Albert Park, because if there's one category that's still flaunting
Phillip Island.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Phillip Island.
I'm happy to go to Albert Park next year, mate.
Those engines are still loud as loud as they were.
Loud as hell, mate.
If not louder than they were 10 years ago. So if you want to go hear some real noise, let's go to Phillip Island and see the Grand Prix of Australia.
Speaking of boys trips, is the 12-hour coming up soon?
12 hours coming up on the. I'll give you a date. I'll give you the date. It's on
our calendar, isn't it?
Yeah, it's supposed to be with the day I'm going racing, but I can't go racing. 15th of May.
Lovely.
It's coming up fast.
15th of May. Yep.
FA Cup final weekend. There you go.
There you go. Big weekend. Boys, I think we'll leave it there. I've eaten all the meat and potatoes now, so we'll leave it till next week. So we've got MotoGP racing next week. We'll have a podcast also with, hopefully, Valmont Racing, another interview with another Australian race team as they prepare for the Bathurst 12 hours. So that gives us a little bit of a precursor into that event, which should hopefully be really interesting for everyone. H, Mick, thanks for jumping onto the pod again tonight. It's good to see you again, Mick. It's good to see that the favelas didn't, perforate you with any bullets while you're over there in Brazil.
It's gracious. We've got Brazilian listeners. We've got to be sensitive to that, guys.
And I'm sure they understand the mortal danger that you can be put in when walking through those favelas.
Yes.
Anyway,
Hey, my favorite driver of all time, Senna. So go Brazil.
my favorite movie of all time is Fast and the Furious 5. So go Rio.
Oh my goodness. You need to eat some more meat and potatoes.
All right, boys. Have
all
a
right,
good
boys.
night.
Good
Top
night,
night.
boys.
Thanks,
See you,
guys.
gents. Bye.